You were the experiment, the responsibility, and the sacrifice, all rolled into one kid who never got a say in the matter. And the researchers who spent years studying over 5,000 children just confirmed what eldest children have quietly felt their entire lives. That the psychological cost of being born first is something nobody in your family ever warned you about. By age 3, firstborns are already being pushed harder than their younger siblings, given more cognitive challenges, more reading time, and more pressure, all before they even understand what pressure means. And the wildest part is that their parents do it unconsciously, completely unaware that they are quietly shaping a child into someone who will spend the rest of their life carrying weight that was never theirs to carry. But that is only where it starts. Your parents practiced on you. Before your younger siblings arrived, you were the prototype. There was no older sibling to copy, no family system already in place, and no roadmap for your parents to follow, which meant every single parenting decision they made was tested on you first. Clinical psychologist Dr. Kevin Lehman spent decades studying family dynamics before writing the Birth Order book, and his most brutal observation is that firstborns are the laboratory of the family. And that word, laboratory, should make you uncomfortable, because laboratories are places where things get tested, adjusted, and sometimes broken in the process of figuring out what works. Your parents were stricter with you because they were scared. They had no idea what they were doing, and anxiety makes people tighten their grip. However, by the time your younger siblings came along, those same parents had relaxed because they had already survived you. They had already made the big mistakes. They had already learned that a toddler touching the oven once and crying does not require a full family crisis meeting. So your siblings got the looser, calmer, more confident version of your parents, and you got the early draft, the version that was still figuring itself out. That gap in parenting experience created something in you that researchers call the achievement pressure effect. A 2017 study published in the Journal of Human Resources found that firstborn children score notably higher on IQ tests than later-born siblings, sometimes by as many as 3 full IQ points, with the gap widening during early childhood. But the reason is not genetic. The reason behind it is focused attention, and what that attention quietly builds over years. Firstborns receive more one-on-one parental interaction before any other child enters the picture, and that focused attention builds cognitive structure faster. The problem is that it also builds something else, and that something else follows you into every classroom, every job, and every relationship you ever have. The weight you cannot put down. There is a specific feeling that eldest children carry, and it is difficult to explain to people who did not grow up as the oldest. The closest description is this: you feel responsible for things that have nothing to do with you. Your younger sibling fails a test, and somehow you feel like you should have helped them study. Your parents argue, and your brain immediately starts scanning for what you could do to fix it. Something goes wrong in any group you are part of, whether that is a family, a team, or a workplace, and your instinct is to absorb the problem and solve it before anyone else has to deal with it. Psychologists call this the caretaker role, and it develops early, usually around the time the second child is born. A 2019 study in the journal Developmental Psychology found that firstborn children show far higher rates of what researchers label parentification, where a child unconsciously adopts adult-level emotional responsibilities within the family system. This happens because parents, stretched thin with a newborn, naturally rely more on the oldest child, asking them to help, to be patient, to be mature, to understand. And the oldest child desperate for approval and connection, says yes every time. But the psychological cost of saying yes to everything across decades of childhood is enormous. Clinical data consistently shows that firstborns develop higher rates of anxiety disorders than their siblings. A study from the University of Warwick found that firstborn children are 24% more likely to report feeling anxious or depressed in adolescence. And the cruelest part of that statistic is that most firstborns reading it right now are not surprised. They already knew something felt heavier for them. They just never had a number attached to it before. The perfectionism that eats you alive. Nobody tells an eldest child to be a perfectionist. Nobody sits them down and says, "Your identity is tied to your performance, so make sure you never fail publicly." But that belief gets installed anyway, slowly, through thousands of small moments across childhood. You got praised when you did well, and noticed when you did not. Your parents compared you to an imaginary standard, not because they were cruel, but because you were their first experience with watching a child grow, and every milestone felt high stakes to them. That fear transferred onto you, and it lodged itself deep. Dr. Joshua Hartshorn at Boston College analysed birth order data across 377,000 participants and found that firstborns consistently score higher on conscientiousness and lower on openness to experience compared to their siblings. What that means in plain language is that eldest children tend to follow rules harder, work more systematically, and struggle more with taking risks or trying new things. They are more likely to choose safe careers. They are more likely to stay in situations that are not working because leaving feels like failure. And they are far more likely to hold themselves to standards they would never apply to anyone they love. The fictional prototype of this dynamic is someone like Hermione Granger, a firstborn archetype if there ever was one, a character so driven by achievement and so terrified of getting anything wrong that she sets herself on fire to keep everyone else warm. The real-world version of that character is exhausting from the inside. You push yourself to a standard that moves every time you reach it, because the goalpost was never really about the goal, it was about the fear underneath it. Why you struggle to ask for help. There is a pattern that shows up in eldest children in therapy that therapists describe as the lone competence trap. It goes like this. You became the capable one early, the one people turn to, the one who figured things out, and that role became part of your identity. However, accepting help now feels like dismantling something fundamental about who you are. Asking for support feels like admitting that the version of you people relied on was actually fragile underneath, and that terrifies you more than burning out does. A 2021 longitudinal study tracking 1,200 adults found that firstborn children were far less likely to seek mental health support than their younger siblings, even when reporting identical levels of stress and emotional difficulty. The researchers concluded that eldest children internalize self-sufficiency as a moral value rather than a practical skill, which means reaching out starts to feel like a character flaw rather than a reasonable human need. And that is where the real damage lives, not in the overachievement, not in the anxiety, but in the inability to let anyone see that you are struggling. Because you spent your whole childhood being the one who held things together, the idea of falling apart, even privately, even safely, feels like a betrayal of the role you were assigned before you were old enough to understand what roles even were. You did not choose this, but you can choose what comes next. The research on birth order is not a life sentence. Dr. Alfred Adler, the psychologist who first seriously studied birth order in the early 1900s, argued that the conditions we are born into shape us, but they do not determine us. What they do is create patterns that run on autopilot until someone shines a light on them. And the moment you can name the pattern, you have already started interrupting it. The eldest child who finally learns to rest without guilt, to ask for help without shame, and to fail without catastrophizing, is not abandoning the strength that their childhood built. They are keeping the competence and releasing the cost. And that, for anyone who grew up carrying more than their fair share, is not a small thing. What makes this especially hard is that the people closest to you often do not understand it. Your younger siblings watched you be competent, so they assume you are fine. Your parents point to your achievements as proof that the pressure worked. And in a twisted way, they are not wrong, because the pressure did produce results. However, it also produced someone who ties their entire sense of worth to those results, which means the moment the results slow down, something inside starts to panic. That panic is not weakness. It is the nervous system of a child who learned that love and approval were performance-dependent, trying to survive in an adult world where the rules are supposed to be different, but somehow feel exactly the same. If this hit closer to home than you expected, subscribe. Because this channel goes deep into the psychology of why you are the way you are, and there is a lot more where this came from.